Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of McNulty's Book Corral. I'm your host, Thomas McNulty. Today we're talking about one of my favorite writers, Robert Nathan. Now, Robert Nathan may be a name that's not familiar to quite a few of you. Robert Nathan was born in 1894 and he died in 1985. He was 91 years old when he died. Nathan began his literary career in 1919 when he published his first novel, Peter Kindred. That set off a fantastic and amazing career. Now, I want to tell you up front, I am a fan and collector of Nathan's books. That's not uncommon for me, as you'll see as you watch this video series. I collect Robert Nathan first edition hardcovers. After Peter Kindred was published, Nathan published widely through the 1920s. His career really changed in 1927 when he published a book that some of you may be familiar with because of the film, The Bishop's Wife. The film was released in 1947, 20 years after the book was published. The Bishop's Wife was a film with Cary Grant, David Niven, and Loretta Young. It's a classic film. I think it's a great film. You should check it out. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. The Bishop's Wife was a real big hit for Nathan, and it is available on Kindle. Robert Nathan's estate has been actively putting the books out for ebooks for you to download. So check out The Bishop's Wife. I think that's a really good starting point for people interested in exploring Nathan's career. It's one of my favorites, but I have some others we're going to get to in a moment too. So Nathan tapped into, with The Bishop's Wife, a literary device that he would return to time and again. And that was the fusion of romance with a supernatural element. I'm sure you're familiar, for those of you familiar with the movie, you know that the angel comes down to earth and falls in love with a human. Interesting twist on that from Nathan. The book is beautifully written, as all of his novels are. So check out the movie, check out the book. Nathan's career really took off. He was a contemporary of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who he knew, along with John Dos Passos, Louis Bromfield, and Stephen Vincent Benet, who was a very good friend of his. These were really the elite of the New York literary circle in the 20s and 30s. And Nathan was very much a part of that group. In 1938, he had become so popular that his back catalog was being reprinted. And one of those is this fantastic collection, The Barley Fields, which includes The Bishop's Wife. So there are 5 novels reprinted here. And this was put out by the Literary Guild, which was a book club that lasted through the 70s and I think even the 80s. I don't know if it's still around. So The Bishop's Wife is included in this 1938 edition, along with some of his other early novels. His career had just taken off. Great addition to find for you book collectors out there. And I am, as I mentioned, a collector of his first edition hardcovers. So that's a great one to look into. The same year he did that, he published this book, which is Winter in April. Now take a look. I love the cover, by the way. The cover is what I call New York Impressionism. It's just shy of being Art Deco, but it features Central Park with the New York skyline in the background. Now this book is a deviation from that literary technique that I mentioned for The Bishop's Wife. This is a straightforward contemporary narrative, and with Winter in April, it's a story about an older man who's raising his niece, and he has to witness her falling in love for the first time and all of the tribulations that she goes through. So it's a heartfelt contemporary novel, obviously set in New York. It's a great book. It features what I believe to be one of the best drunk scenes anyone's ever written. I know that Hemingway wrote a really good drunk scene for A Farewell to Arms, but Nathan tops him with this. It's hilarious. Winter in April is a sentimental book. Nathan would be accused of sentimentalism throughout his career. It's a valid criticism, but my contention is that it's okay to be sentimental. Why not? Nathan struck a chord with people. But he was a wise and canny writer as well. With Winter in April, he touches upon current events, and that would be the rise of fascism in Europe. That's a subtext to the overall plot of the older man trying to guide his niece through her first love affair. Great book to read, one of my favorites. So if you get a chance, check that out, especially for you book collectors. Now, Nathan has established himself as a best-selling author in the United States pre-war. And just before World War II begins, he publishes the book for which he is best known, and that is A Portrait of Jenny. Portrait of Jenny, you may be, again, familiar with the film version, which I agree is a classic, starring Joseph Cotton and Jennifer Jones. It was put out by the Selznick Studios in 1948, a good 8 years after this was published. Nathan would remain a best-selling writer throughout his career. His last book was published in the 1970s. Portrait of Jenny goes back, and he touches again upon that literary device of fusing romance with a supernatural element. But here he does it better than anyone had ever done before, and I consider Portrait of Jenny to be an American classic. It's a ghost story, and it's a love story. What a very difficult combination to bring together. From the same period, you may be familiar with the Ghost and Mrs Muir, which is a book that we'll cover in a later episode by a different author. Nathan was better. Portrait of Jenny is a beautifully written book. It is sentimental. The clarity of his writing, the economy of his prose, the characterizations, the scene setting, everything is perfect in this book. It was a major bestseller for him, and this is the first edition hardcover that I have in my collection. Highly recommend, if you haven't read Portrait of Jenny by Robert Nathan, get on to Amazon right now. Great book to add to your Kindle. It was available in paperback for years. I don't collect the paperbacks for Nathan as much as I do the hardcovers, as you can see. I'm more interested in the hardcover first editions as a book collector. So you definitely want to get involved with Portrait of Jenny for those of you interested in something different. Another book that he reverts to that same theme of fusing romance with a supernatural element, but with Long After Summer, he doesn't push the supernatural element. This is a straight out love story. Another bestseller. I think everything Nathan wrote after 1940 was a bestseller. And this is also one of my favorites. So I'm recommending Robert Nathan today, and that's a classic. Later on, Mia was a book that he published, and this was published in 1970, so we're jumping ahead here. Nathan published continuously throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Great book. This is a signed edition, as you can see, which I picked up at auction. I do collect signed editions of Nathan's work when I can find them inexpensively. They're out there. Here's another one of my favorites, where this is a more contemporary book. This one, the professor goes to England, and I was just in England, and he falls in love with this hippie chick with a guitar. That's just a generic rundown on how this takes off. Who is she? Who is this girl? Once again, Nathan fuses the supernatural with romance. Is she King Arthur's true love? Is it Guinevere? Read the book and you decide. Take a look at The Elixir. Great romance novel by Robert Nathan. And once again, in this book was published in 1971, so we're looking at the early 70s. Nathan was consistent in his career in touching upon contemporary events. At least at some small level, he makes reference to global political turmoils that may be occurring during his lifetime. He was acutely aware of what was happening worldwide, in addition to what was happening in the United States. So strongly recommend those books. Those are my primary recommendations for Nathan. Obviously, I have a lot. He published over 38 novels, I believe. Now, Nathan was also highly regarded as a poet. And this is the Green Leaf, which is his collected poems. And he did about 10 of these, I think. I think he did at least 10 books of poetry throughout his life. He was highly prolific. From my viewpoint, Nathan was a writer's writer. He tried everything. He didn't just stick with poetry, and he didn't just stick with the romantic love stories with a supernatural slant. He did a lot of different things. One of my later favorites is Stonecliffe, which is a book that he wrote about an author. This does have a supernatural slant to it. He returned to that time and again, as he did with The Wilderness Stone, which takes its, I believe this one takes its line from a poem by Stephen Vincent Benet, who was, again, his contemporary and a very good friend of Robert Nathan. And The Wilderness Stone is also a signed edition, so hopefully you can see he wrote his name on the front piece. And I have numerous signed editions of Robert Nathan in my collection here. Fantastic author. Nathan was the type of writer that would challenge your religious expectations and get you to think about what was happening in the world. He was very tuned in to contemporary events. Some of his books in the 1950s and 60s touched upon atomic power, the proliferation of atomic weapons, the continuous rise of fascism. The Israeli conflict was very much on his mind in the 1960s and 70s. Really a diverse writer, wonderful writer. His last book was published in the 70s. It was Heaven and Hell and the Megas Factor, and this is the first edition of that. And finally, I want to recommend one of his more popular books as well, which is, and you're going to love the title on this one, So Love Returns. I know, Cowboy Tom is recommending So Love Returns by Robert Nathan. All right, what happens if a mermaid comes out of the ocean and falls in love with a human? I'm just giving you a little generic hint on what this one played out to be. Maybe she wasn't a mermaid. Maybe she was a water spirit. You've got to read Robert Nathan. If you haven't picked up Robert Nathan, he's a lot of fun to read. Just incredible writer. So there we go with Robert Nathan, and I wanted to show you real quick before I wrap this one up. You're all going to jump onto Amazon, by the way, and you're going to order Robert Nathan books for Kindle. Robert Nathan's estate is very active in getting his catalog back out there, so check it out. The Puppet Master from 1925. This is one of the few first editions I have without a dust jacket. This was his third book, so we're going back to the 20s. And again, this is another signed edition that I have to show you here. So there we go. Robert Nathan, what a fantastic man. And here is what he looked like on the back. And here's actually a better photo here, so you can get a look at Robert Nathan. Fantastic author, one of my favorites. All right, so there we go. McNulty's Book Corral. Cowboy Tom is recommending Robert Nathan. Check him out. As always, thank you very much for stopping by. I hope that these recommendations are useful to you. Stay happy, stay healthy, feed your brain, and read a book.